Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Live on Mars. I'm Alex, CEO and founder of MarsBased, and today we'll be talking about no-code. We talked about no-code, we already discussed this subject with Ben Tossell from Makerpad about a year and a half ago, more or less, right before he sold the company to Zapier in March 2021. That's more or less today. We are in mid-January 2022, so almost a year ago he sold the company to Zapier in what would be the first Zapier acquisition ever. We're going to be continuing on this subject with Nile Frater from NoCode. He's an expert on NoCode. He's teaching small and medium and large enterprises to work on NoCode, to provide career paths to non-technical people, to teach people about the benefits of NoCode. So today we'll be talking about technicalities because he's the developer and he holds the opinion that in order to work with NoCode, you need to know at least a certain amount of coding. We will talk about scaling MVPs, we will talk about prototyping, we will talk about career paths for technical and non-technical people, and how no-code can provide an alternative for non-technical companies or perhaps companies who struggle to find technical talent and therefore they want to build their no-code department for their marketing needs, for their marketing projects, or perhaps for their non-core competences and the things that they don't specialize in so that they can reduce the budget, the spend on technical hiring, and also, overcome the difficulty, the global difficulty that we are finding all the companies in not finding enough technical talent, that is, developers. That being said, there is a lot of blunt opinions in this episode, as per usual on our podcast. So we're really thankful for Neil for sharing his experience here and for being so extremely educational and extremely generous with his time and his experiences. And he's got really an interesting fuck up as well. You know that at the end of every episode, at the ending part of every episode, we share one technical fuck up. This one's especially fun. And if you've worked in a big corporation, if you worked in the banking industry, you will find it especially funny. That being said, a couple of things coming from our way, coming as a company update. You can skip this part of the introduction if you want and go into the content. But we wanted to update a little bit because the last episode you heard from us was, first off, there was the interview that I share of yours truly at Indie Hackers Barcelona. But prior to that, I shared a company update in which I was saying that we were getting out of a long tunnel. We had been going through some very difficult months in MarsBased. We wrapped up having the beneficial, the best year finance-wise in the company. We broke our record in revenues. We broke the 1.6 million mark. I think we made 1.7 and something million last year, which is really good. But money is not everything. And that came at the expense of a little bit of burnout, then some stress, some mental health, especially among the founders, and some other things that especially took a dent into our quality and the way that we manage projects, and therefore we're not extremely proud of how we managed the company in the last 6 months. So we wanted to overcome that situation, turn it inside out, right? So what we've done essentially here is to kind of take a break for a while. We decided to take a step back and recapacitate and analyze what went wrong last year, and we have prepared a new set of strategies and tactics that we're going to be employing this year going forward that we're going to be sharing in the next episodes. But I'm happy to say that we have come out of this long and dark tunnel that encompassed about 6 months of the second half of the year. And right now we're facing 2022 with the Gene app and with really positive attitude. And it looks really bright. As a matter of fact, most of our clients, if not all of our clients, have renewed their contracts, and we're happy to announce that we have signed a contract with the German-Swiss multinational Haufe, for which we'll be helping them to develop some of their applications in React, helping their development center. They've got a nearshoring center in Barcelona. No more details can be disclosed, but of course you will be hearing more about them and their projects, because sooner or later they're going to be appearing in this episode, because we plan also to get you in touch, get you in contact with our clients as well, so that you know the kind of tools that we build, the kind of projects that we work on. And as a matter of fact, in a couple of weeks, you will be getting an episode about one of our most prominent clients right now, in the Spanish feed of the Life on Mars podcast with Singularu, with Paco, with one of the founders of Singularu, and who is an jewelry e-commerce from Valencia, for which we built a really, really outstanding e-commerce to help them scale internationally using combination of React, Locomotive, CMS, and Shopify, right? More technical details, maybe you'll get them on the podcast. You will be speaking at length about this project. That's something that we're going to be also blogging about, and you'll be getting more details. But yeah, so this year, besides listening to us bragging about stuff, besides listening to me and my co-founders and some of our employees coming on the podcast, you will also get to know our clients, which in the past you have heard about them or from them only occasionally. What else? A couple of quick announcements as well. We also have raised our prices to our current clients and our new clients. So if you want to work with us, right now you will be facing the increased rates because, as I shared in our last episode, the great resignation or the big movement in which millions and millions of people are changing industry or changing jobs right now is affecting everybody. There's an incredible shortage of developers in the industry. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a lot of companies being sold to bigger players. A lot of small boutiques, a lot of dev consultancies, dev shops, agencies, and whatnot are selling. So if you are in the Barcelona startup ecosystem, you know that our brothers at Codegram sold to Factorial, for instance. We know of a couple of Polish dev agencies that we respect and admire. They are holding talks for acquisition as well. And a lot of other companies have been selling, and they're kind of like, perhaps they wanted to focus more on development, on product. Maybe they were not that interested in business. They just wanted to cash out, which is also a very legit outcome of your entrepreneurial career and efforts, right? We, as MarsBased, we have also been having a lot of approaches. We're not taking talks. We're not taking meetings to discuss acquisition because we're here for the long term. We don't plan on selling. So that goes to you if you were potentially thinking about acquiring us. We're just not in the right mindset. We think there's a bright future in front of us. We are looking forward to kicking ass in this 2022. With our team, with our project, with our clients, with our commitments as well. So we're really excited about what's to come. And last but not least, we're also working on a new website. So finally, after a break that I had to take and we had to put the project on pause for about 3 months, something like that, we are finally getting our hands on our new website. We're working with our provider of choice for this, which is Lasse Johnson from Attico 3, one really kick-ass product UX UI agency from Barcelona. And we're working together to create the new experience of our website. And man, I can tell you, it's looking great. It's looking fucking slick. And we want to create that wow effect that we had 7 years, almost like 7 years ago when we created our current website. That it held for so long. Even nowadays, we still get like, wow, your website's so cool. It looks outdated. I mean, it looks great, don't get me wrong. But it's not as shiny, as bleeding edge as it used to be in 2014, 2015 when we first launched it. So that's what we're looking after with our new effort on the website. So looking forward to sharing it with you. It's going to take at least a month or two to finalize the designs and kind of like get our hands to build the website. So most likely you will not be seeing the website before our 8th anniversary, which is coming up in March this year. I'm being overly positive here and optimistic, and perhaps too optimistic. So I would assume that in the first half of this year, you'll be seeing the new website, which we are still deciding on which platform we'll be building it. Most likely on Locomotive CMS. If you're interested in this CMS, that's the tool that we've been using to build Startup Genome, for instance, to build the new website of Singularu, to build some other projects that we've had in the past. And we have interviewed their CEO, Didier Laforge, a few episodes ago. I think it was released over the summer or prior to the summer, if I remember correctly, about June, July 2021. So you might want to go back to that episode and hear more things about it, because it's a really good product. We fucking love it, and it helps us to build really kick-ass websites. And it keeps developers happy. That this is really important when working with CMSs and prepackaged software. That it has to be a really good software. It cannot be a mess to deal with. It cannot be really complicated or impossible to develop for that, because we've all been there. it's hugely demotivational when you have to be forced to work with a project with a software that's really complicated to work and it's not rewarding. This one, developers love it. I can tell you as much. I love it myself. We love it ourselves at MarsBased, built with Ruby on Rails, and we look forward to implementing the newest versions and the new product coming from those people as well. So stay tuned for that. That's enough from me for now. So let's jump right into this episode. Now, welcome to Live on Mars. How are you doing? Good morning.
Really good, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
All the way from Scotland. But you are actually normally based in Barcelona. You moved to Barcelona in August. What brings you to Barcelona, and why are you in Scotland right now again?
Well, at the minute I'm in Scotland for kind of just Christmas and seeing the family. But today in Scotland it's about 3 or 4 degrees, and I think that probably answers the question on its own.
That probably answers the question. We've got like 14, and it's pretty sunny. It's so sunny I had to put the curtains on because otherwise I would be blinded by the sun. I guess that's not the case in Scotland.
No, I've not seen the sun since I got back about 2 weeks ago. And when I was in Barcelona, it was starting to kind of drop down to about 14, and I thought that was cold. And then I got back to Scotland, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot what this is really like.
People forget very easily and very quickly how cold it is in their home countries and how shit the weather is everywhere else, right? But like, I'm not saying Barcelona's got the best weather, but it's got a pretty good weather.
Yeah, it's that thing where whenever I go on holiday to a hot country and it gets like a little bit cold, and to me, I mean maybe like 18 degrees, which is not cold here in Scotland, but in Barcelona, I always see people wearing these big jackets, and I wonder how they do that. And now I understand it. You're acclimatized to the heat so quickly.
Yesterday we hosted the last Startup Grand event of the year in Barcelona, and there was the director of Startup Grand Glasgow, actually, with some of his Scottish friends, and because of COVID, we're not allowed, it's very regulated to do the networking part inside the buildings, and so we had to go to the rooftop of the co-working space we're hosting the events in. And so, the instructions from our side were like, bring motherfucking jackets and everything, because it's going to be like 13, 12 degrees. And the motherfucker was there in a t-shirt. So it's like, oh, that's perfect. It's perfect a Scottish summer. That's taps off weather.
Yeah, I was going to say that. There's this website called Taps Off.
Taps Off.
It just tells you every day, I think if it's over like 16 degrees, then it's time to take your top off,
It's always taps off. All right, that's actually that kind of website. It's a good segue to start talking about what you're building. What are we going to be discussing here, which is a continuation of the conversation we had with Ben Tossell from Makerpad almost a year ago. Then a few months later, his company got acquired by Zapier, and I wanted to continue the conversation because I think we left it at a very interesting point, which is when you scale shit up with no code, right? But before that, maybe give a brief introduction of what's NoCode, the NoCode.tech, the project that you were working on, and what got you into NoCode.
Yeah, so, I've been in the no-code space now since, I think, about 2013, 2014. I can never quite remember, but whenever Webflow came out, that's when I got started. Before that, I was a programmer, and I was always really good at the kind of back-end bit. That always made a lot of sense. But whenever I tried to build something on the front end, it just, it looked dreadful. It looked like something, that a dog would eat for dinner. And so when I found Webflow, I sort of realized, this was a way not to avoid coding, but it was a way for me to sort of use what I knew, which is like, I knew kind of how HTML
to avoid front end.
Yeah, exactly. Like it kind of let me just actually design something that was, I'm not going to quite say great looking, but okay looking, Yeah. And so kind of, I quickly, I think just over the years after that, started picking up any kind of no-code tools I could find, and I quickly got to the point where I just wasn't really writing code anymore. I just didn't enjoy it. I always kind of thought it was a means to an end for, I cared a lot more about what's the product that I'm going to build. And so, yeah, I got really into the no-code space, and then fast forward to 2018, I found this website called NoCode.tech, which at the time was owned by a chap called Sam Dickey. I bought that over, and that just also happened to be the start of the kind of big, popular no-code boom that people like Ben and others were all involved in, and so yeah, from there it's just really grown, and today NoCode.tech is kind of one of the biggest, no code information sites out there. We're number one in Google for no code, and we're teaching, thousands of people every month how to build projects, how to find the right tools, etc. So it's really exciting.
I find it really interesting that you, as a developer, right, transition to no code, which is the first myth I wanted to bust in this episode, is that real developers don't need no code. I mean, for me, I see an analogy. Maybe I'm the first person coining this, but let me know your thoughts about it. I am a guitarist, and I started recently, or this year, taking up bass guitar, right? And we always think of bass guitarists as like failed guitarists, right? Bass is for people who are frustrated guitarists, right? And maybe I thought, no code, it would be exactly the same. The developers, if you're a frustrated developer, maybe you go into no code. But then you try bass guitar, you try no code, it's like, oh, now I get it. So was that your experience as well? Were you reluctant at the beginning, or were you more open-minded than perhaps I was?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely more open-minded, and I think for me that was just because, I don't think I was ever necessarily bad at coding, but I definitely never loved it. I've met a lot of engineers who are just obsessed with coding, and they just they find a beauty in it almost, and that was never there for me. Right. But I think there's kind of a couple of things about no code, right? Yes, it does let you obviously build code visually and sort of, you don't have to have quite the intricate knowledge of syntax and libraries and frameworks and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that no code is just really, really good for is, you think about, I don't know how long you've been developing, I'm guessing quite a while.
Well, 15 years plus, something like that, yeah.
Right, well, there you go. So how many times have you built login functionality, email functionality, payments functionality, so on and so forth?
Yeah, repeating. Yeah, it's like repeating all the time, same shit.
Totally. And maybe that's just like the controversial take, right? But I feel like over the years there have been, so many frameworks and libraries that promise that you're never going to have to write that stuff again. They're going to take care of it. It's commodified. And on the development side, for some reason, maybe it's changed in the last couple of years, right? But on the development side, for some reason, that promise is never met. I always have to end up rebuilding all of this stuff and finding libraries and whatnot. And on the no-code side, actually that's kind of been taken care of. I don't remember the last time I built a login in no-code. I don't remember the last time I did, in terms of things like emails or payments, that I really did more than connect a Stripe API or a Zapier call. And so, I think no-code, especially for commodified software, which today is a lot of software, I think it just moves so much faster.
But you're raising, let's get into specific examples, and that's a good explanation. And I want people, because I remember some feedback we got from that no code episode. It's like, yeah, but can you talk about more specific examples? For instance, I remember, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So 1 year ago, 1 year and a half ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were hired to develop an application for the health system of Catalonia, right? And while my two co-founders were developing on weekends, because we decided, wow, that's that's like a fucking global emergency, right? So we have to do it. Let's do it on extra time. The three founders are gonna code this shit, and we're gonna make it happen because the timelines were so tight, right? And while my two co-founders were developing an application, and that was pure code, I was in Rails because it was basically an active admin, something that we can spin up in 3 days. I developed in no code a ticketing system, right? Because all of their departments and all of their stakeholders in the project, they wanted to have their say in features, reporting bugs and whatnot, but they were sending it through WhatsApp, Skype, email, and whatnot. It was crazy. So I developed an integration with, I think it was Typeform, Zapier, to Airtable, and then Airtable to GitHub, right? On paper, it sounded perfect. However, there were certain things I was not able to do using purely no code. Oh yeah, it was pure no code, but there was still some coding because I needed to transform the data on Airtable. We could have avoided the Airtable, but I knew that somehow the data was receiving from Typeform, and the one required by GitHub was not exactly the same. It was not formatted the way I wanted to be. So I ended up adding Airtable in the middle so I could transform the data. And then, using formulas and whatnot. So there's a little bit of code here. Is that what purists would call this is a low code and no code, or where are the lines? Where do you draw the lines there?
So I define low code as any sort of tool or platform or whatever that lets a developer move faster. But the key word there is developer. In my opinion, you simply cannot. You can't use low-code tools really unless you actually know a bit about coding, and preferably you know a lot about coding. Whereas no-code platforms, sometimes you still need to add code, and I'll come back to that in a second, but sometimes you still need to add code. You definitely still need to understand how computers work and all the kind of various logic statements like, decision trees and that kind of thing. But ideally, a no-code platform becomes a no-code platform when a genuine non-technical person can use it. There might be a learning curve, and it shouldn't be, a 6-month learning curve, because then you might as well learn to code. But, if a non-technical person can start to produce real software out of a platform in a couple of weeks, to me, that's a no-code platform. But the thing that kind of happens a lot is, we kind of talk about this idea of the 80-20 problem in no-code. This kind of idea that you can probably build 80% of what you want, but the last 20% of business logic, you might need a bit of custom code or a developer or something. And I think no code started out with an 80-20 problem. I think now it's more like a 90-10 problem or a 95-5 problem, because there's just so many tools coming out and so much progress and just speed of progress in the area. So you were talking about that you had to transform data. There's a really cool tool that's out now called Parabola, and Parabola just lets you pull data out of Airtable or anywhere else, and then do all these almost data sciencey transformations and all sorts of kind of changes and edits. And I've seen some really, really crazy workflows on there. And that's the kind of thing where, if you end up knowing the whole tool landscape and you kind of know a little bit about what you're doing and how these tools all interact, you probably can build 100% of what you want in no code. But of course, there's a huge difference between, for example, me, and obviously I know a lot of the tools out there. That's kind of my day job, right? There's a huge difference between me and, the non-technical person who found no code yesterday and is trying to bring this to life.
Yeah, and also one of the things, the reason I brought Airtable into the conversation is because that's usually the part where I struggle the most when with no-code projects. I've built like 5 or 6 already. I don't think it sounds like too many, but I always end up needing Airtable to transform the data, because it's not exactly what the client wants, it's not exactly what my friends want, and it's not exactly what the other side of the let's say the output part of the funnel needs, right? And so I end up replacing traditional code by Excel formulas, right? And so I end up struggling there because I'm not great at Excel. But I feel like for business people, it's better to have to work on Excel formulas, because at least they can understand that. So at a certain point, they can just go and edit the formulas themselves, and they end up being more productive. But of course, at the expense of me not being really versed in formulas, when I can do it really quickly using a bit of Ruby, a bit of Java here and there, right? So you mentioned this other tool. I didn't quite get the name, but is that only for big data, or does it allow also for smaller transformations so that we can avoid Airtable? Because it seems like a bit overkill to me.
Yeah, no, it totally lets you do kind of smaller transformations. I mean, it's probably a little bit larger scale than what you might do with an Excel formula, to be fair. I would probably start running data through it if I had, it's quite arbitrary, but let's say 100 rows in a spreadsheet. Yeah. But I think the interesting thing there is, a lot of no code is, the way I kind of think about it, that there's always this kind of big chat around everybody should learn to code, we should teach it in schools and all this kind of thing. And I partly agree with that, but I also think, I kind of think the idea that anyone ever can learn to code or will learn to code is very much a myth. I just think for some people, it's like learning a language, right? There are 110 different ways to learn any language, be it Spanish, French, Catalonian, etc., or Catalan, I should say. And, it's just different methods work for different people. And I kind of think of every different no-code tool out there as simply a different expression of how someone thinks you might be able to learn to program. So, whether I use Webflow or Adalo or Bubble, those are all just a different company's attempt at, this is how you might be able to learn how computers work. And Excel's kind of like that. I think in a kind of business environment, there are usually a lot of people who know Excel, and there's a lot of like operations departments, for example, that essentially rely on somebody knowing a little bit of maybe even VBA or something like that. And those are really, really good people to adopt no-code, because quite often, they've already got a little bit of slightly kind of sort of technical skill. And now you can just make them a lot more productive than what they can do with a couple of cells in a spreadsheet,
Spot on, actually. But the bigger you go when it comes to companies and departments, that's probably the second. Another subject I wanted to tackle here is that the more often than not, corporates, they like the idea of no code. They just don't like the reality, right? Idea is great. We don't have to code. We don't have to rely on developers. The reality is like, oh, now we have to buy a license. Pay for these 7 different softwares that we didn't pay for, and they're not exactly compliant with our corporate bullshit, right? And they're not compliant with our security. It needs to be revised by our chief data protection officer and CTO and whatnot. And so they end up stuck in the same place, right? Because instead of having one application being audited, they have to integrate, Typeform, Zapier, Airtable, Bubble, and all of the others, you name them, right? So how have you encountered this situation? How do you advise corporates to solve this or go around this?
Yeah, so before I was working full time on NoCode.tech, I was working at Lloyds Banking Group, which is one of the biggest, I think the biggest retail bank in the UK. Amongst many, I looked after some engineering teams and all sorts of things there, but I also had a no-code team, or as we called it, the internal software team. And, trying to get no-code software in there was very, very difficult for a few reasons. Number one, it's just such a different model. This idea, usually in the business world, right, they call it a citizen developer. And that just brings out a lot of worries, and there's stuff like, so okay, you can teach a non-technical person to drag and drop an app together in an interface. That's kind of one challenge, but there's lots of things that you and I as developers kind of inherently know. So for example, we know that if we were going to run a query on a database and that takes a second, that is eons in database time. That's a problem almost, Whereas if you're taking a non-technical person who just doesn't have that kind of experience and doesn't know that kind of thing, then it's quite hard to teach. It's quite hard to know what to teach. And so, these are the kind of, from a personnel point of view, these are some of the kind of questions that start to come up. And then, of course, that gets you into this whole murky world of, so how do we prevent this becoming more shadow IT? How do we make sure we don't suddenly have 450 apps running all over the place and data going in and out? And you can see where that inherent distrust comes from, because yes, you can teach someone to build an app, but it's a lot harder to teach them to essentially be a software engineer and all the kind of professionalism that comes with that discipline. And then the other kind of problem you have in the no-code space is the vast majority of tools are, number one, consumer focused, and number two, cloud hosted. Now, obviously, the enterprise world is a lot better with cloud hosting now than they were several years ago, but more kind of regulated industries, healthcare and financial services, etc., they're still very, very worried about it. They're still worried about, Capital One happening to them. And so, I was always surprised at some of the discussions we got into where, we'd have a document that suggests, okay, this particular no-code tool is on AWS, but it looks like the data passes through Germany and France and, Algeria and all these places where it was quite surprising. And so we had to then go and collect documents to sort of show what was happening to the data in all those places. And it just quickly, went from the kind of thing where, it was a totally legit process. I can see why it had to happen in a way, but also you're looking at that thinking, oh, this could easily take a few months or a year just to approve the software before we even get people trained on it,
Yeah, in terms of like corporate or more like enterprise companies, I think no code is more well suited for internal tools, of course, because then, I don't know what's your idea with relation to intellectual property, right? I don't even know how that applies to no code, as like I've only used no code for internal tools, and at MarsBased we use a lot of no code for internal tools. So basically, it's like you're not going to increase the GDP of your company with these tools because they're a bit of Typeform, a bit of Zapier, a bit of here and there, and so but like I don't know, maybe for startups it would be interesting to sort of avoid no code for public facing parts and then use it only for internals, so that the public facing parts, which essentially end up being more like their core business, that also helps them to increase the valuation, because up until today, coded applications are still more valuable than no code applications when it comes to, where you're being audited. There's a tech due diligence. That's how they are priced. Now, I don't know if you got any ideas with this and how that's going to change.
Yeah, so, my kind of view on the world is I just think software is more valuable and yet less valuable than it was 5 years ago. And what I mean by that is, I think how we use software and how we get the value out of it and how we're productive with it and maybe even how we distribute it, all those things are a lot more important now than they were even just 5 years ago. And actually, no code is part of multiple trends that I feel are starting to kind of just really commodify software. Like a good example of this is the fact that GitHub can now, essentially predict what lines of code you're going to write, and you hit a key and it writes them for you. The whole kind of co-pilot thing. So I think the value of software for software's sake is coming down, and so I think that and I think the number of people who are going to care about is your internal tools built with code or no code or so on and so forth, I think that's going to reduce. And I think well, there's always I don't know, is this controversial, this idea that we have a lot of devs in the world, but we still don't have enough and we can't keep up. I think the more work that we can take off of these devs so they can go and focus on big custom things, the better. If you can hire a no-code engineer to come and run your internal software rather than, someone who could also be, writing a customer-facing, real code app, I think there's just a lot of value there. And I think, I do think no code gets a bad rep in the sense of actually there is a lot of things that can be genuinely polished and customer facing and work the way you want them to be, to work. But I think one of the things that's lacking at the minute, if you let's say you start a no code MVP, for want of a better term, and you launch it and it goes really well, you've got users, they're giving you money, maybe you get some funding, and it's time to go and build a team. It's still pretty hard today in 2021 to go and put together like a proper no-code dev team. It would actually probably be easier today to go and put together, a code dev team, and so I think that's one of the kind of issues with using no-code software today is just the ecosystem is coming and it's exploded this year, but it's still not quite, well, it's not really anywhere near the programming ecosystem yet,
Okay, no, that's a really good point. Let's continue this this thread, because I'm like, I never consider, it sort of dawned on me that what you're saying here is that essentially no code could be like a great way for maybe marketing departments who usually have got a huge dependency on developers, but oftentimes they cannot get hold of these developers because they're developing on the core system of the platform, right? And the CTO is like, oh no, just outsource your shit, right? Which is what happens with most corporates. A lot of corporates we've worked with or big companies, they're like, their developers work on the core, and then they outsource their internal tools, their marketing shit and stuff like that. That's when, they use contractors, they use agencies like MarsBased and whatnot. But if you build internally a team of no-code people, which essentially come as cheaper, as you said, that regular developers, not so much interested in the cheaper part, but maybe it's easier for you to assemble this kind of team because right now it's a huge boom. You can find these people, they're extra motivated and they want to create stuff. So it feels like it's a great moment to be into no-code. That could be a solution for the internal operations bottleneck when it comes to having developers around multiple departments for big companies, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think the problem is you have to grow them. Today, as I say, if you want to find a software engineer, you can probably Google that and find a million job postings, and it's a very understood industry and pay scales,
Yep.
etc. And that's just not quite the same with no code yet. It's very hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard right now to go out and hire, 5 no code ops people. However, it's a lot easier to take the people who are already in your business, who already understand it, who already have motivation, and teach those people and give them the ability and the skills and the capacity to start making improvements. One of the things that I am bullish on, as people see these days, is systems thinking. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but in a lot of businesses, especially kind of larger businesses, sometimes they bring in people, consultants, or they teach people in the team. They teach them this methodology called systems thinking, and I spent a while not really understanding what it was. But the idea was you're able to visualize a system, and that could be anything. It could be how your app works. It could be how a customer service operation works. And the idea is you're able to sort of figure out how does information flow through the system, where are all the handoffs, how do we optimize the system. And so for a while I was kind of like, all right, that just sounds quite buzzwordy. What does that actually mean? and then I had a bit of an epiphany one day where I was like, oh, I know what this is. That mindset when you learn to program and one day things just click and you learn computational thinking. It's like you can see the matrix and suddenly you're like, oh, this data flows to here, to there, yada, yada, yada. Systems thinking is the kind of non-technical version of that. And the thing that's good about people who can do systems thinking, or indeed programmers, is typically they'll just think about systems in a totally different way from the average person. And I know that sounds really obvious, right? But a lot of people will come in and they'll do their job and they'll kind of look at it and they'll go, well, I've got to do it this way because this is the way things are. A lot of people can go, oh yeah, I'd love to whip up a program that could do this, but I'm an accountant, I'm not a programmer, so on and so forth. And so what I've kind of realized is if you can give people systems thinking skills, then quickly they can optimize, whether they're marketing, whether they're operations, accounting, whatever it may be, they can optimize what they're doing and they can sort of see how they can improve the system, be more productive. And so for me, in the enterprise and in large companies and even medium companies, no-code tools are essentially like a visual way of teaching people systems thinking and then almost giving them that ability to execute on the new ideas that they have. And I think the more, so certainly at NoCode.tech, that's something that we want to push out there, and I think the more companies that can adopt that, I think that, to me, that's the real exponential productivity boost. It's the real promise of no code. I mean, I know it's really, really cool. You can build your Airbnb clones and stuff, and I love doing that too. But I get really excited thinking about how do you give the average Joe in a company who's non-technical today, how do you give them the skills to just change the way that they and their teams work?
Yeah. Before we go into the scalability issue, which I think it's like a big box that we need to open. What's your opinion on building MVPs using no code? Because on the one hand, it's great, it's cheaper, it's faster, it allows non-technical people to also have their say and implement shit. On the other hand, there will come a day in which it will be really painful to remove the no code, right? And so what's your opinion on building MVPs in no code?
Yeah, so this is one of the things I get asked a lot from our customers who are kind of wondering should they use no code or not, and people always talk about MVP, and MVP is kind of it's a fairly broad term actually because it means a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah.
My view is, first of all, no code is a great thing to build an MVP in. Anything that lets you do an MVP quick is good. But my view is people are often very quick to think about how do they move off the MVP and onto code, and I just always ask people why? What is it that you're trying to get that no code doesn't give? Now, this is always really specific to the person's idea and to the platform they're using. But quite often there's not really a need to move off for a very long time, until you've got a lot of customers and a lot of revenue and you can start to easily afford to bring in devs to move away. And I think the other thing is I don't think I've ever seen anyone take a no-code app and then replicate it in code. Usually what actually happens is they run a no-code app maybe for a year, maybe for a couple of years, and then they essentially shut that down and rebuild a new version entirely, because their business that is based around the app has moved on so much, essentially just it's that kind of question of like, everybody's always ready to move on, but what are you moving on for? Because if you can build more features, you can do that in no code. If you need to scale, you can do that in no code as well. And so there's not really a framework for it, but I definitely think people move on from no code far too quickly.
Yeah, okay. No, that's an interesting point. I think, like, for instance, from my point of view, and even though I'm a coding guy, I think that more and more people should test their business ideas in the super early stages with no code, because I see a lot of entrepreneurs saying like, oh, I need to build a startup, but first off, I need a CTO, I need a coder. It's like, why? Not nowadays, not anymore, right? Like, that's not required. You've got no code. You can teach yourself how to use and implement this shit so that you can test your business hypothesis. And then later down the road, maybe you want to move off no code, because otherwise you will encounter some problems with investors not investing in no code, because that's not IP to the company, or it's not as valuable as like real code, or like that wouldn't stand a technical due diligence from a big VC fund, but like that's in post-seed stages or things like that. But that's a good problem to have, all right? You can build your shit, test it really quickly, iterate really quickly, and then move on, and then build a real thing if it really makes sense. But you don't spend other people's monies, or worse, your own monies, into building something that you don't know whether it will take off or not, whether it makes sense in terms of business or not, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting, like, just on what you were saying there around, VCs and investors, and it's not IP. I partly agree with that, but also, so one of the things that I do on the side is I sort of buy, run and sell small companies. So NoCode.tech started out as that. The idea was to buy it, hold it for a year or two, and then flip it. And actually what ended up happening is the company really, really took off, and it became, a huge space. But this is, in theory, this is kind of what I do. And I've bought a couple of companies before. And when I'm looking for companies, generally what I want to do is find like a startup or a company that's been, written in normal code. And then I kind of want to think to myself, can I quickly switch that out for no code? Because when I'm taking over a project, I kind of don't want to deal with the hassle of someone else's code and how it's been written and all the, the technical debt in there. I just want to replace it with no code as quickly as possible, because to me, it's simpler and easier to manage and just easier to work with, which is quite a kind of contrast to that kind of view of, as no code IP. But I think it also kind of talks to why, like, when and why you should or shouldn't, move off no code. If you have a CTO, then brilliant. That person is probably most comfortable writing code, and so they should go and use code. But, if you are a non-technical founder and you're becoming your own technical co-founder with no code, there's really, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to quickly move away from the platform that gives you agency, the platform that lets you be your own technical co-founder. Because the minute you move on to using devs, then as a non-technical co-founder, you're going to be right back where you started, which is you don't understand the product, you can't move it forward yourself, so on and so forth. I guess the contrast to that as well might be that, if you're a non-technical person and you're sort of like, you're just trying to make this happen, but, you don't really know what you're doing, you're just kind of trying to get it all moving along, it's not as polished as you would like, then that's probably a good sign that, okay, yeah, as soon as you can afford it, get someone in to help and move off no code. But those are all quite personal situations rather than related to the product itself,
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. I'm gonna share my opinion, because I think like a couple of things came to mind right now, and you said something that's very interesting. I think that the fact that most companies are hanging on to coding and are so reluctant to having no code integrated in their systems is a sort of problem that perpetuates the systemic problem with the glass ceiling of not enough people being able to enter the development world, right? Well, maybe we can open it up by using more no code, because clearly there are not enough developers in the world, and there are not enough technically skilled developers for all the companies. And at the very end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know what your experience was when you were a developer, in your previous companies, but all you do as a developer is move data up and down. That's it. And then fix front-end bugs, right? A very small percentage of the developers in the world are solving like real world problems and science fiction and shit, and they work at Tesla, they work at NASA, they work at Google. If you're not at one of these three companies, chances are you're just moving data up and down, up and down. So a lot of this shit can be either automated or it can be solved by using all of these no-coding platforms that maybe would create a fairer landscape for non-technical people or less technical people to enter the development world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of bias there, and I think there's often an attitude that people in IT are really, really clever and they know this tech world inside out, and no one else could possibly enter it. And to that, I kind of say, like, let's take away Google and then see how good at programming you are. Let's take away Stack Overflow and see if you can still write that code.
Correct.
But I think the thing is, like, understandably, right, people are worried that if you take a bunch of non-technical people and you let them build apps and you let them touch data and they start to touch customer data, at some point that has to go wrong. It's the same way, like, I don't know, if you brought out if you have a robot that can do surgery, you probably still want a doctor monitoring that robot and telling it what to do. You don't suddenly want just any Tom, Dick or Harry in there saying, just go and take the spleen out. I get that. But the thing that's quite good about no-code tools versus programming, when you're programming, you can do anything. You've just got a notepad and you put whatever you like in there and it'll do it. Whereas with no-code, because the tools are, limited by the fact they're visual, that is also putting you in like a nice playpen almost. It's putting you on rails where the only things that can go wrong are whatever the tool allows to go wrong. So, if the tool is automatically optimizing database queries, as an example, then I can't really, hang the database or something like that. Similarly, if the tool is auditing, keeping an audit trail of every change that's made, then I can't really go and mess something up and not know, who did that or how it happened. And there's already login functionality built in, so it's quite hard for me to go in and build an insecure login or make security mistakes, because the tool's kind of already making sure I don't do that. And I think that's one of the nuances that's kind of lost in this idea of can non-technical people actually build good software, as it's all the things that no code prevents them doing in a positive sense.
And exactly, that brings me to the next point, which is one of the other myths that we get to hear, and I get to hear from a lot of really technical CTOs that I respect a lot, is that, well, with no code, you've got more single points of failure in your application because you depend on more stuff. It's like, well, dude, your application sits on OAuth, Stripe, Sentry and Algolia and AWS and all of that, and we've seen plenty of times that this shit fails too, right? So maybe what we need to have, like, I don't know, I want to hear your opinion on this, is maybe more role examples of real world applications that are built with no code and they employ hundreds of people, or they are dealing with really sensitive data, or they're working inside a bank, things like that. Maybe we need to have more examples, because for me, for instance, of course, I'm not as versed as you are in no code. I don't know any big example of no code. I would love to give them, because it's essentially the same that happens when I'm selling Ruby on Rails. And they're like, oh, Ruby, I heard it doesn't scale. It's like, well, dude, your application sits on top of Stripe or GitHub. Both applications are built with Ruby on Rails. Are you using Shopify? That is Ruby on Rails as well. Are you using Netflix? That's Ruby on Rails. So everything that you're using nowadays, pretty much a lot of things are using Ruby on Rails. But people don't have these examples top of the mind. Maybe that's what happens with no code. I don't know if you have some examples that can help me to sell no code a little bit better to our clients.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely there's not nearly as many examples as there are with programming. Not yet, not exactly. But I think the sort of the stability and the security around these things is starting to really spawn some big examples. But I think first of all, there's a lot of companies that are out there that people don't realize are no code. There's an example I like to give. Probably won't help your clients, but so Kylie Cosmetics, which is, I think, Kylie Jenner's, several $1 billion company. To my knowledge, that is entirely run without code, and you could say that's probably true of like many e-commerce brands, because a lot of them are running on Shopify. All right, they might have a custom theme, but the vast majority of these are processing a lot of transactions. They're sitting on, something like Spotify, and they're doing a lot of business and handling a lot of traffic. Similarly, if you want to talk about examples where there are, maybe not quite high stakes, but there's a really cool company here that I spoke to a couple of months ago in the UK I think they're called MedOptimize, and they create software which the NHS here in the UK public health system, they create software which doctors in the NHS kind of, so if you're prescribing a drug, then MedOptimize will automatically recommend either a better drug. So actually, okay, it turns out this patient's got diabetes, so you shouldn't give them that drug, you should maybe give them this one. It will either do that, or it will suggest like a cheaper generic alternative to a drug. So, instead of spending, I don't know, £10 on paracetamol, you can refer them to a generic version that's 40 pence or cents, I guess that would be in euros, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And so, that's really, really interesting, right? Because that's a no-code application. It was built on Zoho Creator, I think, and I think they're currently moving it to Bubble. But, that's healthcare, right? That's kind of healthcare is kind of like the big untouched part of that's kind of the bit where code is not supposed to go. And, it's quite a kind of a life or death use case. Is you're letting a no-code tool actually pick drugs, essentially, and there's another one actually in that space as well, now that I'm thinking about it, CareSourcer. So CareSourcer is a company here in Scotland. Try to make sure I've got the right name there in case I'm mixing it up with something, but
no worries, nobody listens to this podcast, don't worry, they're not going to affect that.
Totally fine. Yeah, so hopefully I've not messed the name up there, but I bet it's CareSource, maybe it's this other one, but I was speaking to the person who runs it a couple of weeks ago at a no-code conference here in Scotland, and they essentially have no-code software for nursing homes. So it lets you sort of manage like who's in the nursing home, how are they getting on, making sure you're getting the right staff for them, making sure that their families kind of know they're safe and all that kind of thing. And again, these are all quite kind of like, maybe not quite regulated, although some of that is regulated, but they're quite kind of life and death important sort of healthcare type stuff, And just to top it off, one of the first ever examples that we had on a website of a cool no-code app, and I think it's still on there, is there is a banking app for the bank. It's some bank in Jordan in the Middle East. Maybe it's just called the Bank of Jordan, something like that. And it's a full banking app that runs on no-code. I admit it is in the Middle East. It's not kind of in the UK or anything like that, but still pretty cool.
Okay. Yeah. We're seeing some examples. Maybe in the coming months, years, we'll have more and bigger examples, because that's what we need. And I'm bullish on no code. I was reluctant at first, but then you try it and you see like it's got its use cases. Of course, for me, I'm biased. It will never replace pure development in certain parts of the applications, but in other parts, it really makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense in MVPs, and it makes a lot of sense in like marketing automation, so that marketing departments can be more independent and less reliant on the developers of the company and whatnot. So it definitely has got its niche things. It can also become mainstream, but time will tell, right? We need more examples, but we need also good stories about fuck-ups. We need to know where it goes wrong. And I want to hear your story. What's the biggest tech fuck-up you've had using a no-code?
Oh, that's a tricky one. What is the biggest tech fuck-up I have had? I'm not sure off the top of my head, actually, what the biggest one would be. Or actually, I'm sort of struggling to think of many. But
when we can learn from. It's like, oh, yeah, I failed to acknowledge this, and that's when it all went south.
Yeah. So I put it this way, I'm not 100% sure, but I can probably tell you some of the things that I tend to see go wrong, albeit on a slightly smaller scale. Nobody usually dies. It's not MedOptimize, we're not picking drugs usually. Where a lot of people go wrong in a few things. Number one, a lot of people. And this is kind of like what I was saying with the professionalization earlier, right? A lot of people just don't really understand security methods, that you and I as developers who are kind of Generally, just there's more to read on this. So people will do stuff like, I constantly see people who do try to roll their own logins and that kind of thing, and they start to do things like in fact, I figured out my no code fuck up example. Here it is. It's the same thing. So I used to work for a company. I won't name the company, and the company had this problem with. You heard of this, the idea of like user enumeration. So if I go to a forgotten password box and I put in an email address, what it should say is, if that email address exists, we will send you an email. But sometimes what it said is, brilliant, we have that email address, we're going to send you an email. And so that, as an attacker, very low level, but that tells me that
this exists.
This person exists, yeah. And so, I kind of now know they're a customer of yours. And that there's something in that. So here's the second part, right? So this company kind of sold like a sort of financial product, not quite a financial product, but a lot of their customer base were kind of older people with a good bit of money, and usually a lot of trust in the company as well. Usually kind of long-term clients. And so that was part one, right? I could quickly figure out how many users or who was using it. The second part was, there was an exploit on the website where they just hadn't set up security permissions properly. So if you navigated straight to a URL, it would let you in. And the URL just so happened to be this kind of page that would like send an email. So it would kind of like, it would take a form, it would take some details, you could put in the email address, and it would send a branded email to the recipient. However, the big problem was the content of the email was in the page. So if you knew what you were doing with a bit of JavaScript or a bit of Chrome DevTools, you could go in there and you could change that email. So let's look at the situation, right?
All right.
I know I can take a big email list and I know which people are clients of this company, and I can now send them a branded email from the company, from a company address, and I can write whatever I like in it. So thankfully no one did this. I managed to find this before anyone did it. But what you could do, this was a big company, right? So you could easily take an email list from the UK of let's say about 1 million people, and you could be fairly certain that there would be at least 100 customers in that list. Really big company. And essentially what you could do there is you would then be able to send them an email that says, oh, hey, I'm from this company. We never managed to take your payment. Could you just go on this link and sort of, click it and just give us your payment details, please? And, that's the kind of thing where like, everybody knows about phishing scams, right? But people don't expect to get a phishing scam from an actual official email address with an actual official link, and that's the kind of thing that you could do here. And so, that was a pretty scary example of what could have really went wrong, because that's the kind of thing where that could almost be like national press. I mean, the company wasn't. Well, they were nationally known, but maybe not quite front press material. But it's a really good example of just like that could go so badly. And where the kind of no code fuck up was in there is these bugs were just put in by people who weren't like they could build an app with a no code tool, but they just didn't really know the security features. They didn't know that user enumeration is like a common issue. They didn't really think, oh yeah, someone could probably go and edit the email that we've got sitting, under the hood here. It was just those kind of little things where like you and I would probably spot that because we've been in this game for so long. But how do you teach people that? How do you kind of say there are 1,001 things you need to learn, and by the way, here's 2 of them,
Funnily enough, I remember the first time I saw the message, the error message you get on upon validating email, saying that if that email exists. The first time I saw it, it was not that long ago. Perhaps we're talking about 10 years, something like that. Makes you wonder how we operated prior to that, right? Which was like we were giving away information to potential hackers that yes, this email exists, and that's a security liability, and it had been a standard in the industry up until, say, 8-10 years ago, right? And it's funny, the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, why are they telling me that we cannot verify whether this email exists? And then I thought like, oh, actually, that's pretty smart, Anyways, that's a really good one. Sorry, I broke you off.
No, I totally agree. And I was just going to say, I think half the problem sometimes is, everybody knows if you can do an SQL injection, that's a huge security risk.
Yeah.
And so people look at something in user enumeration and they think, yeah, it's a bit of a problem, but not a big deal. But it's when you start to combine these flaws together. So no, it's not a big deal until you also have a way to email all of the customers, and then it becomes suddenly very dangerous.
Exactly. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a really interesting talk. I think we've taken the conversation to the point it needed to be taken after the conversation with Ben 1 year ago. 1 more minute for you. I'm rolling out the carpet for you. You've got this camera to say 1 minute, 2 minutes. What's going on in your life? How can we help you or NoCode.tech?
Yeah, so I think the big exciting thing at NoCode.tech at the minute is, a couple of months ago, I say a couple of months, but 6 months now, we launched our No-Code University. So it's a place where you can come along and sort of learn how to actually do no code from learn it from a techie, but it's very, very non-technical. But we will teach you what is a database? How does that work? What are some of those kind of common security flaws? How do you avoid them? And essentially everything that we talked about today. So if you do want to learn to build no-code apps properly, that's the place to go. And also, if you are in any way interested in working in the no-code space or filming any kind of content and doing any kind of education, then please reach out. We are about to open up a bunch of job opportunities across development, education, and some other stuff as well. So just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you very much now. See you in the next episode.
Thanks, Alex. Cheers, bye.